Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. We're going to talk about React hooks. Now, as you know from early on in our React lesson, there's two types of components. There's functional components. So for example, like our main page, which is just a simple function. So we just do a function call and we return some JSX. And that's it. And we have class components. Okay, and the cool thing about class components is that I'm able to have a state object, so it allows me to have internal variables. Because in a function, all the variables theoretically would have to be passed down as props. Okay, I cannot really create its own internal state, its own internal variables that I can change and cause a re-render. And on top of that, I'm able to use lifecycle functions, although I don't have an example right now, because the one time we did use lifecycle functions, which was in our blog page function. This was originally a class function. If you go back to the earlier videos, it has been turned into a hook, and that's what we're here to talk about, hooks. So the idea is, what if I don't want to use blog page as a class component? I want to use it as a function component. Things that functions don't have states. Functions don't have life cycles. Well, thankfully, the good old people at React have built that into React. Okay, and this is what's referred to as React hooks. So the easiest way to think about it is React hooks allow you to have the stuff that class components have in your functional components. Theoretically, meaning you'd never have to use class components anymore. So you don't have to worry about the this keyword anymore and binding the this keyword. You don't have to worry about constructors and destructors and all this fun stuff. You can just do a function and we'll show you sort of how that would work. So there's two hooks. One hook is going to simulate state and the other hook is going to simulate this lifecycle functions. So the one that simulates state, okay, so one hook that represents state and another hook that represents lifecycle functions. So let's walk through them. So whenever I need to have like a state variable, and you can actually create multiples of these. So a function can have as many of these useState things as you want. And the way it works is that you always call it with an array. So you'd say const, and you can do an array. And here I'm saying that, hey, this variable is going to be called my state. So this kind of state-like variable is going to be called my state. But like state, you need some sort of function to kind of set the state, okay? Because it's that set state function. And the reason why is because that set state function is what causes the re-render, okay? Because the function is not just changing the variable, but it's calling the re-rendering of the page as well. This is why you have to use set my state to set the state. So in this case, I'm going to call my setter set my state. So basically what it does, it says the first thing in the array is the name of the variable, and the second thing is the name of the setter. Okay, apologize for any noise in the background. I live in Brooklyn, it's very noisy. But this is going to equal a React useState object. And then in the parameter, the first parameter is basically the value of, or the initial value of the state. So I'm just saying this state, this my state variable equals initially an empty array, and that's it. Okay. The reason is I want to use it to store my API call. So to store the data from my API call, which I haven't done yet. Now I want the API call to happen when the component loads. But a function doesn't have anything that it automatically, like it doesn't have lifecycle functions, meaning it doesn't have anything that says do this when it starts, do this when it updates, do this when it dies. So they had to create a way of doing that, and that's what the useEffect thing does, okay? And the syntax on this can be a little, it's initially straightforward. So if I do React, basically just do react.useEffect, and you can create multiples of these too, and you just, and it takes two parameters, and you only need to put in one. That's the function. The function that you pass in as the first parameter is basically what it's going to do when this effect gets called. So in this case, it's just going to go get my API data, okay? And then what it does, again here, it's going to set my state to the value of that API call. Okay, so all I'm doing is setting my state, which is setting this variable over here. Yeah. Now the thing is that that's the first parameter. Now if I don't do a second parameter, so basically what we did here is I defined, so again here is actually the full function, that full first parameter. And inside of it, what I did is actually define the function inside of it. The reason is I only want this get post function to have scope within this useEffect. So it's just a way I did it to get the effect that I wanted, because useEffect in itself is not asynchronous, but I wanted the right get post as an asynchronous function. So I had to do a separate definition of the function to use the async keyword, which is why I did that. And then immediately calls get post right after I defined it. But notice I do comma and then there's an empty array. To keep it simple, all the empty array does is it turns it into a component will mount lifecycle function. If I take that out, then it's a combination of will mount and update, which means it'll run this useEffect every time the component updates, which creates an infinite loop. Why? Because the effect is setting the state. Setting the state will cause the component to update, run this again, update the state again, rerun it again, and it creates this loop that I don't want. So I put this array as a second parameter, and it just means, hey, the first time this thing runs, that's when you do this. If it updates, don't do it again. If I take this out, if it's something you do want to happen over and over and over again, I can just take out this array and just leave the function, and that'll do the job. Okay, so basically useState is so that way I can create a state variable in my function. And again, see, it's a function, not a class. And then useEffect allows me to do lifecycle functions. And then again, just like a normal function, I return stuff, and it works. Okay, so if I go to the blog page, see, there's my blog post. It's doing the job. It's working well. So that's all hooks are. Okay, they allow you to do the stuff that you could do before in the class component without having to worry about binding and this keywords and constructors and all the little things that made class components sometimes a little burdensome for people. Here you can just make your variables, say, hey, this is what I need stuff to do, and move on and keep everything functional. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. I'll see you guys later on. Have a great day and enjoy.